we sell arms to the Saudis and the Emiratis for a variety of reasons, but not just solely to make money. But I do think, and it came out particularly in Noel's and Stephen's comments, that there's a large measure of misunderstanding of both Saudi Arabia and Yemen in London and Washington that helped fuel our policy towards this war. I think that there was an overestimation of, I think in some ways, of Saudi importance, and the Saudis know I think that. Both Saudi capacity and Saudi capability, and whether or not the Saudis even really had a plan going into Yemen. My understanding is that they did launch the attack with very little notice to us, and whether or not our ambassador had flagged it, that's not quite the same thing as actually knowing that it was going to happen. But there was I think there was a lack of depth of understanding of what the Saudi capacity was to even do a military operation. I think most of us who have worked on the peninsula for a long time know that despite decades of military assistance and military training, the Saudis really couldn't hit a stationary object if it was standing in front of them. And that they are not given to putting boots on the ground. And I completely agree. And most military analysts would agree that you cannot win a war from 30,000 feet. So the idea that the Saudis could go in 2 weeks, this scruffy little group of Houthis would collapse in the face of Saudi military might was, fantastical. From both sides, because it also, I think, represents a lack of understanding of the dynamics within Yemen and what was driving this conflict and who the Houthi were and what the degree of both dissatisfaction with the Saleh government, but also the degree of antipathy towards most things Saudi within Yemen. And I would say my British colleagues can also tell me, agree or not, that usually when somebody comes in and bombs your country to a great extent, you tend to actually get your back up. And I think the British very well demonstrate that. It tends to solidify opposition rather than crush. For Americans, I would say, take a look at our bombing of Hanoi. These kinds of campaigns are not going to work. It was never going to work in Yemen. So we overestimated the Saudi capacity. I think we overestimated our relationship with Saudi Arabia. And I think that all sides very much misunderstood the dynamic within Yemen and how this was going to play out. I would also say, I do think that there was a fundamental misalignment of our policy towards Yemen and the British when we shifted to a CT focus. At least when I was ambassador, we had very much of a development and liberalization focus. And I had some conversations with Ali Abdullah Saleh when he wanted to know if we would sell him or provide him more weaponry. And the answer was no. And it wasn't because the Saudis weren't going to like it. It was just because they didn't need it and they couldn't use it. But when we shifted to CT, both of us, and if we shift back to CT when and if this war ends, we are going to have a very distorted policy towards Yemen. Because in a sense, what we're asking Yemen to do is revert to being our proxy war. What we don't like about this current war is that we can't pursue our own proxy war of going against Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And we didn't really see Yemen as an active partner. We saw them as a compliant partner. But it very much took our eye off the ball as to what was going on in terms of the political and economic development, and therefore the root causes. of the collapse of the Saleh regime and the ultimate civil war. So we need to, I think there is a deeper realignment of our approach to Saudi Arabia with Biden versus Trump. I think most Americans, or at least Americans who follow these things, were rather appalled at the Trump embrace of the Saudis. And I think the Saudis overplayed it. If Mohammed bin Salman thinks that a return to a Republican Congress is going to be to their benefit, they're very badly misjudging, I think, the degree of anti-Saudi sentiment on the Hill. And so that would be another miscalculation by the Saudis, who are so good at those. So I think we need to sort of bring into focus a much more realistic, candid appraisal of who Saudi Arabia is as a partner, how their actions actually fit with our interests, what we can expect from them, and the degree to which they are going to act independently to pursue their interests. And then I would also hope that at some point we are able to once again work with Yemen as Yemen, and not work with Yemen as a dependent participle to our relations with Saudi Arabia. I will very much underscore what Mustafa said, is that, we do need to recognize Yemen's own strategic interest and our own interest in a not secure Yemen, which is a militarized Yemen, but a stable, sustainable Yemen. And if you really want to get at CT, you get away from the idea of dropping drones and you start focusing on actual development, actual governance, actual state building. And to the extent, as I said, if we revert to CT, we are going to undo whatever comes out of this war, and we will just simply be setting Yemen up for continued failure.